Thanks.
All right, so let's get started. Just wanted to let you know we're recording the session, and if you don't want your face or something to be in the recording, feel free to close down your video as well. So let's get started with effective speech contest judging. Let me first ask you this question. I want you to go to the pollev.com, which is I'm going to put this in the chat. If you can click on this link and tell me what you think is your status at this point. What's your judging and competing experience?
It's asking me for a username.
You just give it, call it something. It doesn't matter. Just.
Oh, it's telling me it's not found, so it wants an actual username. Is everyone else getting that?
I don't see anybody responding, so I don't think anybody is getting. Yeah.
Okay. Never mind.
Yes, did anybody?
I got the same thing.
I had to type in a longer thing. I tried my just initials, but.
Yeah, but I mean, we're going to use this a couple of times in this session, so you might want to put in a username.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, when I put Diane, it worked.
Yeah. Okay. Well, would you please tell me where you are on this continuum?
I do not see the poll yet.
Oh, okay.
I see waiting for Diane's presentation to begin.
Diane's presentation or?
No, it says Diane's presentation. I followed the link and then it asked me for a username. I put in my name and it says waiting for Diane's presentation to begin.
Okay.
Mine says presenter not found.
Presenter not found. This is just funny because something has happened to this Poll Everywhere session where I activate the session and it still doesn't show up on my screen. But essentially, let me just ask you this question, since it's not a very too many people. How many of you here have never judged before or never competed before? How many of you have judged sometimes or maybe not competed? How many of you have competed sometimes, have not judged? Or how many of you have just done it many times? So how many of you have never judged before? Judged once, competed 3 times. Teresa, thank you. Anybody else? Clyde, Diane. Oh, Diana just said. I know David Hollingsworth has judged many, many times. So let's keep going on this particular presentation. And let me start talking about what we're going to talk about today. Is we're going to talk about judging basics. We're going to talk about judging an online contest. Then we'll talk about the 2 contests that we have in the spring, the evaluation contest and the international contest. We will do some examples of judging, and then we'll have a discussion on either of them. And hopefully we will get done on time. Judging is not evaluation. Basically, as a judge, your main job is to pick a winner. And it is based on the judging sheet that you get, and you will be following that judging sheet all the time. Ultimately, the person you pick as winner and the person who wins moves on to the next stage of the competition. Well, because you are judging the people's speeches against the criteria, your reaction, you're looking at what did they do versus what did they not do, and so on. And as a judge, you do not have to explain your decision to anybody in the world. It's a private decision that you basically send your ballot to the chief judge, and that's basically all that you do. Whereas an evaluation is more about you have a collaborative discussion with the speaker and you're helping them through that and so on. So that's the difference between judging and evaluating. Main question, who can be a judge? Essentially, at a club contest, all you have to do is be a paid member. From an area onwards, you have to have been a member for 6 months. You have to have completed a minimum of 6 speeches from the old competent communication manual, or you should have earned level 1 and level 2 of any pact. So those are the basic requirements to be a judge. And then, of course, you have to be physically present at the contest at which you're serving. More importantly, who cannot be a judge is a contestant, of course, cannot be a judge. The chief judge cannot be a judge. Contest chairs, all the different people who are in the organization part of the contest, they cannot be a judge. At a division or higher, anybody who is a member of a club with a contestant cannot be a judge. So basically, you got to remember that very simple thing, they're supposed to be free from bias. If you want to learn more about judging and how to judge and so on, there's a Toastmaster link at Toastmasters where you can go to, under Leadership Central, go to speech contests, and they have a whole bunch of tutorials on judging as well. Now, as a judge, you are expected to adhere to a code of ethics. First code of ethics says you should consciously avoid bias. Of course, there's a lot of unconscious bias that we have, and we will talk about minimizing those unconscious biases. But consciously, you're not supposed to be biased on trying to think about what club, what area they are, how long they've been a Toastmaster, or they should not, technically not supposed to consider their age, their sex, their race, all those different things that we don't discriminate against at work. Is the same thing you got to think about when you are being a judge as well. You got to demonstrate the utmost objectivity as a judge. Next thing you are not supposed to consider is the timing of the speeches. It should not matter to you how long the speech is, whether it is 3 minutes or 8 minutes or whatever. You're judging the speech itself by itself. So you should not consider the timing of the contestant. The overtime, undertime is something that the judging team will consider. And the last thing, support by word and deed the contest rules and judging standards. So mainly, do not, diss the contest at the end of the contest. You're not supposed to go out and say, I don't know why that person won. I did not place him first at all. I did not place him at all, or something like that. So do not make qualitative comments about the contest and the way it was run and things like that. Whatever opinions you have, leave it privately. Do not say that at the contest venue or at the Zoom meeting or something like that. Now, to be a good judge, you have to be accurate, which means that you have a consistent standard of judging, that you're judging everyone by the same standard. And that's why you have a ballot that you're given that you're supposed to follow, basically to make sure that all contestants are judged according to the same criteria. That's one way of being accurate. You're supposed to be fair. You don't allow friendship or affiliation, or the fact that, he's a man and you're a man, and so you have the bro code or something like that. You're not supposed to use those kind of things to affect your judgment as well. You're supposed to be trustworthy. So all contestants and everybody are looking to you as the judge to make sure that you're choosing the best speaker according to the criteria to be the judge. And you want to make sure that you live up to that trust. And judges should be very knowledgeable. Good judges know the current contest rules. So I'm going to put in the chat the speech contest rule book. And I think that this is going to be one of the most important things that you want to use in your for yourself. You want to make sure that you are always having this. Let me put this in the judging speech contest rulebook.
Good
So the
morning.
speech contest.
Are
Yes.
you late? Good morning. Just getting myself organized. Want to jump in here and talk to you guys a little bit about
Hello.
women's.
Who is talking? Okay, Teresa, would you please mute yourself? Thank you. All right. So I just posted the speech contest rule book in the chat. This should be this is the one that guides everything in the contest. If it's not in the rule book, then it doesn't exist. So you got to remember that everything that we do in the contest comes from the rule book. So you should make sure that you look at the rules all the time, make sure that you have it with you, and make no exceptions to the rule. And they also know how to use the judging form. And ultimately, you're a good listener, that you fully listen to every speaker. If you're a judge at a contest, that you're not multitasking, doing different things and having 10 different windows going and so on. So you want to make sure that you are paying full attention to the speakers. But we are all human, which means that we have some barriers, some unconscious biases that we have to always try to overcome. The first bias that people normally have is what is called speaker position, which means that if you have 6 or 7 contestants, that you either think the first speaker is the best or the last speaker is the best or something like that. And you have a bias that basically says by the time you come to the 7th speaker, you've completely forgotten what the first speaker did. So you are supposed to guard against that bias. So that's why during the 1 minute of silence, you want to mark each contestant's points according to the same criteria. So at the end, you're not giving one or the other more bias. Another barrier to objectivity is called champion for the underdog. You go, oh, that person had a really bad, sad childhood. And so since they said that in their speech, I'm going to vote for them, even though their speech wasn't that good or based on the criteria and so on. So that's one of the barriers to objectivity. Another thing is called the halo effect. So you may go, hey, I have heard David Hollingsworth speak before. He's great. He won the district last year. So if he competes this year, I'm going to give him some extra because he's my golden haired child. So I'm going to give him some extra points just for that. The opposite to that is the reverse halo effect. Yeah, I heard David Hollingsworth. He's a good speaker, but I want somebody else to win this time. So I'm going to just mark somebody else. Just so David Hollingsworth doesn't win or something like that. Another thing is the second time around thing. It's basically that I've heard the speech before. It's just that, so I'm not going to consider them as important as well, or not the norm. For example, in your club, they may do things a certain way that speaker is expected before he says anything to say Mr. Contest, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters and guests. But, this particular contestant did not do that. But because you're not used to that, you go, well, that's not the norm. That's not the right way of doing things. So I'm going to mark him down. That could be a barrier to objectivity. And then, of course, this last big one is we have our own prejudices and personal preferences. And you don't want to let that get in the way of your being an objective judge. Any questions on these so far? I'm going to stop sharing for a minute just so I can see your faces and ask you, does anybody have any questions on what we just talked about?
Hi, Narayanan. This is Diane. Not so much a question. Well, maybe it is a question. It's funny, the last thing you mentioned about a lot of speakers, they start out with an introduction and then they'll say, Mr. Toastmaster and fellow Toastmasters and all that. And frankly, personally, I find that to be kind of contrived, but I see a lot of people do it. So right. I guess I'm glad to hear that that's not actually a requirement, because I don't know, it just seems like a weird thing to me.
I mean, that's why that's the part of not the norm thing. So some people, certain things get overused in the international contest circuit, and then people think, oh, that's the way to do it.
It's the Narayan. It's the Madam Toastmaster, fellow Toastmaster, and anybody who's ever. Yeah, that's
Right.
a real cliche. There's no rule about it. In mine, I didn't do it.
Right.
That's good
And
to
then-
know. Thank
yeah,
you.
exactly. You're not supposed to say, well, because David didn't do that, I'm going to mark him down, or David did something that I think is tacky, so I'm going to mark him down. Right. So the ballot has very specific criteria, and if you mark according to the ballot, you should be okay. None of the ballot criteria says, did the person address the audience in a certain way or something like that. So as we go along and I share the ballot itself, we can go talk about that as well. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go along. Now, protests and disqualifications. And this is something that's we've got to be very careful of, because judges and contestants are the only people who can lodge any kind of protest. And your protest is limited to three things: eligibility, originality, and recently added in the last year, reference to another contestant's speech. So, for example, if the speaker number one said something about, let's say, January 6th insurrection, and then you come along, your speaker number four, and you say, just like speaker number one said, or something like that, that is considered a reference to another contestant's speech. So those three things are now becomes disqualifications. And as a judge, you don't know anything about the eligibility part. You don't know if that contestant is not a member of the club. If you do know, then fine. But if you don't, that is probably not a big deal. But originality and reference to another contestant's speech are some things the voting judge must be careful of. If you have heard the speech before, or if you think the speech is not substantially original, then you should protest. You should protest to the chief judge. You should protest to, and then say, basically all you have to say is, I have a protest, and then the contest basically comes to a halt until that protest is handled. So, and again, as a chief judge, you're not supposed to consider protests from other audience members. Like if you're actually in a room listening to a contest and you're a judge, if your neighbor turns to you and says, hey, I've heard that speech before, you can't consider that unless if you don't know for yourself that that's an original or not original speech. And before they can be disqualified based on originality or reference another contestant's speech, the accused contestant has a chance to respond to the judges. And then after that, the judges have to vote after the contestant leaves the room to say whether they believe him or not. And then based on that, the final decision is made. And the contest chair is the person who usually has to make sure they are eligible to compete. And if they don't do their job, then that's the last protest as well. And ultimately, whatever the voting judges and in the case of the finals, the qualifying judges say are final. Any questions on that? So let's talk about judging an online contest, because nowadays we're doing all online. First thing you should, before you're a contestant, before you're a judge, remember that there will be a dry run, and during that dry run is most of the times when the judge's briefing is conducted by the chief. Your attendance for the dry run is extremely important. And when while you're going there, you should either receive the judge's ballot from the chief judge, or you should go to the district website and go to events, contests, and contest kits and download the international ballot yourself. During the contest, make sure that you dial into the Zoom meeting at least 30 minutes before the contest so you can handle whatever issues and things that come up. Ensure that your equipment works. So make sure usually it's a good idea before you judge at a contest that you download the latest version of Zoom. Make sure that your Zoom has the latest version so you don't have any glitches. try not to attend, especially if you're a judge, try not to attend by using a smartphone, because smartphone has some limitations. The Zoom app on the smartphone is different than the Zoom app on a laptop or a computer. So it doesn't have many of the features. Getting an in and out of a breakout room becomes a problem and so on. So as much as possible, try to log on using a laptop or a computer. Then once you do that, when you're looking at the ballot, it's the same as marking the ballot as if the contest was held in person, but you get a PDF document. So download the PDF file to your computer and then open it from your computer. If somebody sends it to you on an email, don't try to open it directly from the email. Many times the changes you make will not be saved. It's better to download it to your laptop or your computer on your local drive and open the copy that was saved in the local drive. And then mark your ballot for each contestant. At the end of the contest, you will be invited to a breakout room with all the other judges, timers, ballot counters, and the chief judge. Once you have spent the time tallying up the points, you're supposed to decide who is the first, second, and third place according to your points. And if your points end up in a tie, as a judge, you are expected to break your own ties. You cannot put two names for first place or something like that in your ballot. You're supposed to have one person per place. List those names in the proper order at the bottom of the ballot. And one of the things, good things you don't have to do in District 29, you don't have to submit the ballot electronically. All you have to do is get on a private chat with the ballot counter and then type in my answers. First place, that's Joe Blow. Second place, Mickey Mouse. Third place, Donald Duck, whatever it is. And you put that in and send it in as a private chat to the ballot counter. But if you are the tiebreaker judge has an added responsibility that as a tiebreaker judge, you have to judge every single contestant. So for you, it's not just the first, second, and third place. If there are 5 contestants, you got to judge first, second, third, fourth, and fifth. If you have 7 contestants, you have to rank all 7 of them in the order you think. So that's the key difference. All the regular judges only have to send first, second, and third place. Tiebreaker has to send all places. And you sent it to the chief judge, not to the ballot counters. And if you are a timer, make sure that you record the timer and send it as a private chat to the chief judge. Now let's talk about the 2 contests that District 29 is holding. Evaluation contest is the first one. And at this point, I think I'm going to send in the ballot in the chat so you can follow along with me. Let me put in the evaluation contest, and then let me also put in the international contest. So we're first going to talk about the evaluation contest ballot. You might want to open the evaluation contest ballot. A typical ballot for any contest looks exactly like this. You have the top portion, which is the criteria for selection, and the bottom portion is the judge's official ballot. So within the evaluation contest form, you have 4 different sections: analytical quality, recommendations, and technique, and summation. So let's start with the first one. Analytical quality is 40% of the points. It refers to the effectiveness. How effective was the evaluation? Did the evaluator, did his or her evaluation really was a good evaluation for the speaker? They are supposed to analyze the strengths and weaknesses of the speakers. Was the comments clear? The evaluator's comment was clear. Did they identify specific strengths and weaknesses? So you're supposed to look at all those things and then decide whether they did well or not. The next section is recommendations, which is 30%. A good evaluation should have recommendations for improvement. Some of us in our clubs, we get evaluation from an evaluator who basically says, "Oh, your speech was so great, and I have nothing to say. I feel like I'm such an insignificant piece of dust, and I can't say anything bad about your speech at all." Now, that's not a good evaluation. A good evaluation should have recommendations of for the speaker to improve better. And these recommendations, as they say, should be practical, helpful, and positive. And they should enable that whatever recommendation is given, that the speaker can take that recommendation and actually improve their presentation skills. And then technique and summation, that's the last 30% of the ballot. Technique is how well did they present it? Did they do it in a positive manner? Were they, harsh to the other person? Did they say one good thing and then 10 different bad things? Or did they say 9 good things and not a real bad thing at all? All those things come under technique. And then summation is important, that at the end you want to tie it all up with a nice bow. When you present the evaluation, you want to make sure that the summation is very important part of the evaluation as well. So you got to summarize the evaluator's comments, and you got to be positive and encouraging. So those are the sections on which we are judging the evaluation. For the evaluation contest, basically the test speech, or the model speech, as we call it in 29, must be a contest type speech or a project speech from the Toastmaster Pathways project. It could be like a project. And then we have a form that we give the evaluation contestants called the contestants note sheet, which basically is a blank sheet of paper, so that the contestants can make notes on that. And at all levels, it is recommended that the Toastmaster giving the model speech or the test speech should not be a member of the same club as any of the contestants. And of course, the test speaker is introduced just like a contestant with a name, title, name format. And none of their objectives of what they're giving the speech for is known to the contestant as well. And at the conclusion of the speech, all contestants will leave the room. Then they have 5 minutes to prepare the evaluation using their note sheet or whatever. And this will be under the control of a sergeant at arms who will stay in the breakout room with them. They're not supposed to use digital devices. So for example, their friend is sitting in the main room listening to other evaluations and texting the other contestant. That's not supposed to happen. Again, it's on Scout's honor, so to speak. So you've got to remember that as well. After 5 minutes are elapsed, no further preparations is allowed, and all contestants must hand their copy of the evaluation notes to the contest sergeant at arms. This doesn't get enforced in a Zoom meeting, because how do you hand an electronic form and then you can still type in on something else if you wanted to? So this again is a relic from the time when we used to do it face-to-face. And then when the evaluation contestant is introduced, they are introduced by saying their name twice. All right, so now what we want to do is watch a test speech and watch 3 evaluations. And what I'm going to do is encourage you to use your ballot to watch the test speech and watch the evaluations. And then I'm going to give you 1 minute per speaker, so you can mark the ballots as if you were in an actual contest. And then we will, at the end, I'm going to ask you to put it in the chat who you thought first place, who you thought second place, who you thought third place. And then from that point, we'll have a discussion. Any questions before we go into this? Just want to check to see. Any questions? If not, let's go on with this.
Tristan Hosh. The case for Mars, Haven Tristan Hosh. Tristan Hosh. The case for Mars, Haven Tristan Hosh.
It was known as Seward's Folly. $7.2 million. And for a giant block of ice, as they said. And for what? This was the price paid by the United States to Russia in 1867 for the present-day state of Alaska. Taking into consideration the rate of inflation over the last century and a half that had transpired, we have an amount of $125 million. $125 million is less than the daily contribution of the state of Alaska to the US GDP. Each and every single day, Alaska more than pays for the entire cost of its purchase. In the year 1492, the Catholic kings finished expulsing the Moors from the Iberian Peninsula after 700 years. Also, in the year 1492, England and France signed a peace treaty that ended the English invasion of the French homeland. As well, in 1492, the Borgias took over the papacy with the ascension of Alexander XI to be the new pope of the Catholic Church. If there had been newspapers in 1492, these would have been the headlines. However, you would be hard-pressed to find a single American child who could, off the top of their head, tell you about a single one of these aforementioned events. Likewise, it is with great repetition that we constantly hear the songs, the rhymes, and the repeated iterations of how Christopher Columbus in 1492 sailed the ocean blue to make contact with the New World. These examples demonstrate the immense power of long-term thinking. Like a compound interest, it can produce exponential results. Effects that are necessary for the human arrival to and subsequent development of the planet Mars. Is there any doubt that without Columbus, the Europeans wouldn't have eventually arrived in America? Is there any doubt about the economic return on investment of the development of the Americas or of Alaska? In one day, perhaps, in 500 years, it has exceeded even the wildest dreams of the biggest optimists. Mars is relatively close. It has temperatures similar to those of Earth, water, an atmosphere, similar 24-hour day, natural resources, etc., etc. The destination will be Mars. It is not an if, but rather simply a when. We went to the moon 50 years ago with 1/1000th of the technological power that we possess today. The exploration and development of another planet will inspire an entire generation of young people to study math and science, the intellectual capital of which will also benefit Earth in incredible ways. It's worth recalling the quip of Mr. Einstein in regard to the World War, but how he knew not what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. The destruction of planet Earth is a real possibility. And on the line is nothing less than the entire existence of the human race. The ancient Greeks used to say that a society becomes great when the older generation plants trees under which they know they shall never sit. If it were in our power, in our time, Do something great, something important, something extraordinary. We should.
Okay, contestant number 1.
Susan Hewitt. Susan Hewitt.
A smile to melt all the ice in Alaska. Mr. Contest Chair, fellow Toastmasters, and most welcome guests. It really matters who's giving a speech, because the more open and friendly the person, the more easily we can create a rapport with them. We can engage with what they're saying and get their message. And Haven gave us an exemplary example of this tonight, because he has such an open and friendly demeanor. His face filled the screen and his face was open, and I was able to really engage with him right from the beginning. Engage with him I needed to, because what a technical speech. This was no candy floss speech, no bubblegum throwaway literary speech. This was a very deep issue, and there was an awful lot of information in there. And it's great to see a speech where someone has taken the bull by the horns. Literally, if that was a meal, it would be the steak the size of half a herd of cattle. It was something to really get your teeth into there. And I think that's a great thing to happen. So well done there, Haven. One thing though, there was an awful lot of facts and figures there. We had 1492, 1866, 7.2 million, 1.25 million. My head was spinning. And an audience like me who's never come across this topic before, it was a little too much to grasp. So perhaps one thing would be to perhaps either cut out some of the detail or have it in some slides so it's easier to assimilate, because often a visual representation is easier to grasp. And another thing that made it a little more difficult was you were reading. Haven was reading. Well, that's a shame, because the speech would have been a lot more naturally presented had Haven been coming out with the information naturally.
Green.
If a speech is read, one can get into patterns, reading patterns, and that loses some of the engagement with the audience. And this, you might have noticed, was in the rhythm, sort of 1.25 million. I'm sure when he goes home tonight, or he's having a coffee, Haven won't say a cup of coffee, please. He will be saying it much more flowing and smoothly. And I think had he been coming out with it, then it would have been easier to grasp. But the energy he brought to that topic was amazing. It really made me want to go home and research. Well, I'm at home, obviously. I am at home under the law. Go home and research that topic and really understand a little more, because he made me feel really enthusiastic about that. So in summary, what a great smile. A fantastically technical topic grasped with full force. Perhaps a little less data and don't read it, but a great enthusiasm and interest. Mr. Contest Chair.
Let's take 30 seconds to mark your ballots.
We will now Pamela Benjamin. Pamela Benjamin.
Did you see the newspaper? Stewart's folly. He paid over $125 million. Online presenters, guests, fellow Toastmasters, but especially to our speaker who brought this speech of such importance to us. I'm going to help you go through some of parts of the speech that you did really well, and parts that you could work on, and parts that you could learn to grow and get a little better with. I thought you had a commanding perspective of history, and I was just in awe as you went off list by list of some of the really important things and not so important things. So I think your speech really had, the first part was things of the past and then what's going on now. I thought you really showed depth and perception with that. Second thing, I loved your conclusion. Your conclusion that older generations will plant trees that they will never sit under. Profound, beautiful. Last words linger. So I loved your history. I loved your conclusion. Now, what can we work on to get this to another level? I think that if you would have picked one or two pieces of history to contrast and compare, it would have been a little easier. So if you had a strong, real strong opening right after the Stuart's Folly, and then talked about maybe sometimes we didn't really understand the ramifications of history, but now we're seeing things after the moon landing, after Sputnik, all these different things. And what did that do? It ignited our emotion, it ignited our feelings. So I think that would have helped us, because I had a hard time transitioning from one point to the next. But once I started to understand where you were going, I really, really enjoyed it. You had passion, you had integrity when you talked about things that you really were heartfelt. There were parts that I think you could have been a little clearer. You used a staccato, a rhythm that was very, very intriguing and very unique. I really enjoyed it. But if you would have gone a little bit slower at points, it would have been a little bit clearer. So your vocal variety was great, and your introduction was wonderful, your conclusion. But if we just work on those, some of the parts in the middle, then I think it will be an incredible, incredible work. Thank you.
All right, let's take 30 seconds to mark our ballots.
Contestant number 3, Eliza Warren Russell. Eliza Warren Russell.
Hello, everyone. To our contestant Haven, it was such a pleasure listening to your speech as you brought relevant information for these times. I do like the way that you held eye contact with us, because each and every one of us felt as if we were right in the room with you. You kept us intrigued and entertained. I do suggest, though, that you practice with your frame prior to any speaking engagement. For as many times we were not able to see your hand gestures, and your head was cut off at times. I also suggest that you ensure that your hand gestures are able to be visible when you're speaking. Your vocal variety was very much in tune with us. We felt that you were speaking directly to us, as mentioned before. At the end, however, you did end abruptly. You had another minute and a half or so that you could have rounded off the information that you presented, so that we didn't forget what you started with and what you ended with. Again, your vocal variety was great. Your tone was consistent. You did have your pitches and your highs and lows, and we were able to really grasp a lot of what you were saying. Again, I'll suggest that you continue to practice with your frame prior to any competition or any of your speaking engagements, so that we can see all of your hand gestures. Continue to give us great eye contacts as you practice your speeches, and also continue to give us the information that is relevant to today's society. Mr. Contest Chair.
Let's take 30 seconds to mark our ballots. And once you're done, please put in the chat who you thought was the first, in your opinion, the first place and second place and third place. Okay, Diane, thank you for that. Please put your decisions in the chat once you're done. So Ankit, you had the exact same as who? As Diane or as Teresa?
Diane.
Oh, okay. The reason I'm asking is because I chose this and then I didn't realize that they have had some difficulty in actually listening to the model speaker because his video wasn't all that good and it was breaking up. And I said, hey, that would be a good example because similar things could happen when you are actually judging an evaluation contest here. So, yeah. Typically, in that case, the judge can stop the contest for a minute and get the technical issues handled, but they decided not to, I guess. Anyway, so I just want to take the time to discuss what did you, how was your experience actually using the evaluation contest ballot? Was it hard? Was it easy to judge an evaluation contest? I sometimes think it is harder to judge an evaluation contest than it is to judge an international speech contest. Anybody want to take a crack at it? This is the discussion part of the discussion.
Hi, this is Diane. Not so much about using the format, judging the actual judging process, but to go with what you said about those various biases we have, you know, the first, last, middle. One of the things that I always find challenging when judging is to not compare the speakers to each other and to not arrange my scores. Well, oh, I gave this one a 5 in this category, but I think the other one did better. So now I have to give them better points and compare them that way. So what I try to do is I put my contestants from the rightmost side of the form to, and then go left. And then I fold the form over them after I put my markings on for each contestant. So I fold the right edge over so I can't see what I wrote.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Instead of going from left to right, because otherwise I can see my previous ranking. So that's just something I do.
Right. That's a good point. When you're using an electronic ballot, that's very hard to do as well. Anybody else had any comments on that?
For me, hi, this is Ankit. For me, I do have certain demarcations for
Can
each.
I see your video?
Sure. Okay. Yes. So for me, the items, they have certain aspects that I look for in each speaker.
Right.
And especially the delivery matters quite a bit. That's where the point gradients usually differs from presenter to presenter, whether be it an evaluation speech or whether be it a normal speaker speech.
Right.
That's where I usually see, whenever I'm judging, that's where I usually see the contrast, and that's where the first, second, third place gets decided. But other than that, I have my own set of analytical quality. For example, was it clear, focused, and then recommendations. So did they really have valuable recommendations, or was it just something that they are saying because they have to say it? It was a contest. So these kind of things that I have set in my mind, it is probably not a bias. It's just something that I look for in specific speeches, and I give points based on those.
Okay.
So, yes, that's what I.
Thank you. Now let's talk about the international speech contest as well. So we're going to spend not a whole lot of time on this, but we will make sure that we get some of the judging fundamentals in as well. So in the international speech contest, fully half of your points are on content. The content includes speech development, effectiveness, and speech value. So how well is the speech developed? Did it hold my attention? Did it, was it, does the whole speech looks like a unified whole? What was the audience's reception to the speech? Do you think they, what was your own reception to that speech? How did the speech come across? Was there something meaningful in the speech, or it was just a, common message, or was it something important, something new that you learned? In delivery, how did they deliver the speech? So this looks for the physical aspects, gestures and movement and all that. In your voice, what kind of vocal variety they used, and manner. Now, this is an interesting thing about manner. It says that it's the indirect revelation of the speaker's real self. Were they shifty? Were they honest? Were they vulnerable? Was there enthusiasm behind what they were saying? Did they seem to have confidence in their own speech? Those are some of the things that goes into manner. In language, we're talking about the appropriateness. Basically, was there, if, for example, if they're trying to illustrate a dialogue between, people from the South of the United States, if they use the Southern accent, they may use some Southern words that might not sound grammatical, but in the context, it is probably okay. So you got to make sure that the language promotes the clear understanding. So people, when they're using words and they're using grammar and things like that, they're making sure that the words that they're using and the grammar that you're using does not detract from their own from their speech. So I was going to have us go through a bunch of international speeches and do the judging and everything as well, but just in the interest of time, I'm going to not do that and basically let you know that judging and competing are two sides of the same coin. In the sense that, a good judge will be a good contestant, and a good contestant will be a good judge, because both need to know the rules, both need to know how to evaluate, both need to know how to judge to be able to be a good contestant as well. I just want to leave you with a couple of closing thoughts. One which says from Justice Scalia, which said, if you're going to be a good and faithful judge, you have to resign yourself to the fact that you're not always going to like the conclusions you reach. If you like them all the time, then you're probably doing something wrong. So the main point here is that you should be following the criteria all times to make sure that you are judging everybody fairly without as little bias as possible. And last part is that the best part of competition is that through competition, we discover what we're capable of and how much more we can actually do than we ever believed possible. So thank you for your attention, and hopefully you can all go forth and be great judges. Do you have any questions in the last 5 minutes we have left?